Back when I was a kid, I was in Boy Scouts, and my dad was actually the scout leader, and he went through a phase where he was trying to teach us all the different knots that you could tie with rope. But he wanted to take it one step further and actually make the rope itself. So he used this little guidebook to put together a little makeshift rope making machine, and we spent hours winding sisal like this and turning it into long strands of rope. Now eventually we made so much rope we built a horse corral and caught 2 wild horses. That's a different story for another day. The problem with our rope making machine is it generally took about 4 to 5 different people to operate it. So the purpose of this project today is to see if we can make a simple machine that will allow you to make a rope all by yourself. Now I made a quick trip down to my local Home Depot, and in the hardware aisle I found almost all the materials we're going to need for this project today. I picked up 3 1/4" by 5" eye bolts that come with a hex nut already on them. I got a couple different sizes of large fender washers, I got some cut washers, some hex nuts, and I also picked up some plastic caster wheels as well. These are the kind of wheels you'd put on the bottom of a cabinet or a workbench you have out in the garage, but we're just using them for the wheel. We're going to cut the rest of it off. I stopped at the lumber aisle and I got a 1x6x6 piece of common board as well as this 2x2. But these things are a bit too big to work with as is, so let's get busy and cut them to size. So guys, our wood is cut and here's what we ended up with. I took this common board and cut it to lengths of 7.5 inches. I took the first piece and doubled it over the second one and cut them together so that they're exactly the same length. Then I took a piece of our 2x2 and cut it 8.5 inches long. When you put that over the board, you can see it overlaps about 3 inches on either side. And the last piece of 2x2 is the exact same width as the common board itself. So when you put all the pieces together, it should look something like this. So update guys, our wood is cut and it's looking good. So the next step now is to line up our hardware and drill some holes. So the idea here is to take your large fender washers and position them on the board forming a triangle. You want to do it in such a way so that when you add your 2x2 to the top as well as the bottom, it's going to leave similar spacing at the top and the bottom. I also used the width of my bolt as a spacer to create gaps between the washers and ensure that they're symmetrically placed. I think this is the best way to eyeball this thing together without getting super technical on the measurements. And that's looking pretty good, so let's mark the centers. Not bad, I think we got it set. Once the centers are marked, it's time to drill some holes. Now since we have a 1/4 inch bolt, it makes sense to use a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill some holes in this wood. We want it to be just as tight and snug as it can be. When we go to drill these holes, we can put the 2 boards together and drill the holes at the exact same time. That way they'll line up perfectly. And to make sure I get them absolutely perfect, I'm just going to use a couple clamps to hold them in place. All right, let's drill some holes. All right, sweet. So our 3 holes are drilled. We can go ahead and undo these clamps. And theoretically, these things should be lined up perfectly symmetrically. And just for reference, I am going to mark a little arrow on here in case they ever get disconnected and turned around. Putting an X on them like that, they should all line up perfectly. All right, we have finished up pretty much everything that we need to do with the wood for now. So let's move on to the next important step, making the metal spinning hooks. These spinning hooks are going to be made out of these eye bolts. If we put them in a bench vise and tug on them slightly, we can get the eye part to open up and form a hook that we could put a string into later on. We also need to develop a way that when we put one into the chuck of our drill bit and pull the trigger, it spins all 3 hooks simultaneously. And here's what I've got in mind. What if we took 3 plastic wheels and used them as pulleys and connected them all together with a band, so that when we spun one of them, all 3 of them would spin together? Let me grab a hacksaw and show you what I've got in mind. Clamp it right there on that axle. Freedom! Okay, so cool guys, here's what we got. I used my hacksaw to cut through these little pins in the caster wheels and released all 3 of these little plastic wheels. If you take one of your large fender washers and push it against the wheel, you're going to find it overhangs about a 1/4 inch. That's actually really important, and you'll see why in just a second. All right, this is where it starts getting excited, guys, because all of our pieces are cut, all of our pieces are ready. All we have to do now is put them together. Start by removing all of the hex nuts off of your bolt so you just have the naked bolt by itself. You're going to take the end of the bolt and push it through one of the holes all the way through, and then take one of your small cut washers and bump that up from the inside. With the cut washer in place, we want to take our hex nut and screw that on and thread that all the way down until it's as far as it can go. Then take a wrench and crank it a little bit more. Beautiful. And just like that, we've got a bolt that's locked in place but can spin freely as well. And we're going to do that 3 more times. So there we go, our bolts are in there and secured. We can go ahead and take another cut washer now and drop it on top of each one of those bolts. And then it's time to add our little plastic wheels. There's only one problem though. These little holes in the middle are a little bit too small to fit over the bolts. So we're gonna need to drill them out with a 1/4 inch bit first. Beauteous. All right, so the holes on our wheels are cut. What we have to do is just build up the base a little bit so that there's a ridge line on either side of these wheels, because when we put our band on, we don't want it to slip off. And to do that, I'm using some of these fender washers as retaining walls. Now the problem is, these fender washers have a very large hole in the middle, so we need to build them up with a smaller fender washer first. Now these fender washers are the only ones I could find at the Home Depot. It would be more ideal if you could find one with a 1/4 inch hole in the center. However, using what we've got, we can use this wider fender washer with the 1/4 inch hole, place it on top of the cut washer, and then take the larger fender washer and place that on top. Beautiful. And once our wheel's on, we're gonna do the same thing in reverse. Large fender washer first, slightly smaller fender washer next, followed by our cut washer and a nut. Now as we start to tighten the nut, it's important to make sure all our fender washers are exactly in place. And once it looks like everything's lined up in place, go ahead and take a couple wrenches and crank that sucker tight, because we want that wheel to be pinched so tight that it will not come undone. Beautiful. All right, 1 down, 2 to go. Ooh yeah, there we go guys. We got our 3 spinners set and all functioning fine. All right, update guys, the hard part is over. I've got all 3 of our spinners in place with our hooks securely firmed on the other side. And I went ahead and tested all of them to make sure they all spin freely, and all of them do. So here's the challenge. How do we make it so that when we spin one, the other 2 spin at the same time? There's a little solution I've come up with that's even easier than you think. And this is it, an old used bicycle tire tube. Now if you don't have one of these lying around, they're really easy to find. Just go down to any bike store. They throw these away all the time. Used tire tubes they have no use for, so they'll probably give you as many as you want. Take your tire tube, it doesn't really matter where, and just go ahead and cut it right in half. That's gonna give you 2 nice clean cuts just like this. Then take the end of the tube and line it up between the 2 washers and cut off a piece that's roughly about the same distance as that gap, maybe a little bit bigger. Take that piece of inner tube and flip it so that it's inside out, so that the inside is now pointed outside and the thick rubbery stuff is on the inside. Then we're gonna stretch this a few times to make it a little bit bigger, and then we're gonna loop it over all of our pulleys at once. This creates a makeshift rubber belt that has quite a bit of tension, but you can see how it's pulling everything into the center, and that's where our second board comes into play. Because the holes were cut exactly the same, we should be able to push the bolts in place, and that'll line everything up symmetrically. And now when we turn one bolt, you can see the belt drives the other 2 pulleys, and they all spin together. Sweet! So this right here is the essence of our rope making machine, and all that's left to do is take our 2x2s and screw one block into the top and the longer block into the bottom, so it has a couple of overhanging pieces that allow us to clamp this unit to a table. Oh, this thing is looking good. Yeah! So guys, check this out. This is what we have created. A simple rope making machine made with very cheap materials from a local hardware store. What's really cool about it is it has these little flanges on the side, so you can take a clamp and clamp it straight to your table. And believe me, that's gonna come in really handy as we start making rope in future videos. When it comes time to operate our machine, all we have to do is take something like a cordless power drill, latch onto one of the bolts in the back, and pull the trigger. How cool is that, guys? Simple little rope making machine we just built here at home, but the problem is it's still gonna take 3 to 5 people to help make the rope. In the next video, I'm gonna show you how to rig up the rest of the system to automate the process, so with the press of a trigger, one person can make a strand of rope all by themselves. So there you have it, guys. With just a little bit of effort and some low-cost materials from the hardware store, we just rigged ourselves up a pretty cool little rope making machine. And I can't wait to show you in a future video exactly what it will do. Thanks for joining me for this project. I'll be looking for you in the next one. Talk to you then. Beautiful. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. When all your work goes down the drain.